press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update.
Hello dear students, welcome back to the class. In the last class, we understood the significance of response to stimuli. We also understood the two ways of transferring information from one part of our body to another. The two ways are, one is with the help of the nervous system and the other is the endocrine system. And in nervous system, we got to know that the basic units of nervous systems are neurons or nerve cells. We also understood and drew the diagram of a neuron, the structure of a neuron. And here is again the structure of a neuron. And in today's class, we will try to understand the various parts of neuron and how actually the signals are transmitted. So this is the structure of a neuron or a nerve cell. It consists of the central nucleus, and the part surrounding the nucleus is referred to as cell body. The cell body extends into a long tube-like structure called axon, and axon terminates as axon terminating button or nerve ending. And this axon is covered by a fatty layer called myelin sheath. This myelin sheath is made up of fats and proteins as well. The main purpose of myelin sheath is to protect neuron, and also it speeds up the transmission of nerve impulses. It helps in quick transmission of nerve impulses, myelin sheath. And there is another part referred to as dendrites. The short projections of the cell body are referred to as dendrites. Dendrites are the projections we see. So this is all about structure of a neuron. It has a central nucleus, a cell body, and a cell body have got short projections referred to as dendrites, and this cell body it extends into a long tube-like structure called axon, and axon is surrounded by myelin sheath. Finally it ends up as nerve endings or terminating buttons. So this is a structure of a neuron. Now let's understand, how does information pass? How do we detect changes? Changes are observed by us. The sense organs play a vital role in observing, detecting the changes in the environment. So these are the receptors. The five sense organs are the receptors. As and when they receive the stimuli, the receptors receive the stimuli, the sense organs receive the stimuli. Let's understand what happens. So, the functioning of a neuron. Information from the environment, that is changes in the environment or the stimuli, is detected by whom? By our sense organs. Sense organs in a sense, nerve cells present there, tips of the nerve cells present in our sense organs. So these nerve cells are located in sense organs. So nerve cells located in sense organs, they detect, they receive the stimuli. So the major part of a neuron that detects or receives the first information are these dendrites. Actually this information from the sense organs reach in the form of a chemical signal. Some chemicals are set there. Information acquired at the dendritic tip sets off a chemical reaction. As and when the information reaches the dendrites, the chemical reactions or these chemical substances, chemical signals are converted into electrical impulses or nerve impulses. Electrical signals or nerve impulses or electrical impulses. Understood? Stimuli, the external stimuli are received by the receptors, the nerve cells present in the sense organs. Information from the environment is detected by the tips of nerve cells. So these are located, that is the receptors, the sense organs are the receptors. As and when the information is acquired, dendrites receive the first information. And when it reaches the dendrite, they are converted into electrical signals or electrical impulses. So now what happens? Electrical impulse from the dendrites pass on to the cell body. pass on to the cell body, and from the cell body they travel along the axon. What travels along the axon? Nerve impulses. There is a information. Nerve impulse is nothing but a information. For example, when we touch a very hot object, this is a stimulus, change in the environment. We have touched a hot object. So our fingers detect it, our palm detect it. So this is a sense organ. What type of sense organ is this? We feel touch, skin is this, and we feel the hotness of the object, and immediately what happens there? This is what is happening. Information, dendrites receive the information, and that information what happens? It simply travels along the axon. The nerve impulses carrying information travel along the axon, and finally they reach the nerve ending. Electrical impulses reach the nerve ending. From dendrite till the nerve ending, the information is travelled in the form of electrical impulses or nerve impulses. Initially it was like a chemical information. From dendrite till this nerve ending, it is a signal. What type of signal? Nerve signal or electrical signal. And at this the nerve signal is again converted into chemical signal. From nerve ending, this signal has to pass on to another neuron. Is it not? This is the travel of information in a particular neuron. So we have touched a hot object, we have detected it. What should happen? Immediate response should come. So it should travel from our palm, from our fingers, tip of our fingers. It has to travel to spinal cord, or it has to travel to brain. And from there, from spinal cord, some reflex action has to happen. Information has to come back. Information has to move to the muscles, and our muscles show quick responses. All these things should happen, and all these things happen in a very short duration of time. But here what I am telling you is, information from dendrites travels till the nerve endings, and this is one particular neuron, and there are so many such neurons. They are connected to each other, they are placed one besides the other, but they are not in physical contact with one another. They are not in physical contact with one another. There is a gap between first neuron and the neuron that is adjacent to it. The gap between two neurons is referred to as synapse. The gap between two neurons is referred to as synapse. Hope you understand what I am telling. Information is acquired by dendrite. Information in the form of nerve impulses travels along the axon, it reaches the nerve ending, and from here it has to move on to the other neuron. But neurons are not in physical contact with one another. They are not actually in physical contact with one another. So what should happen? There is another mechanism here. There is a gap between one neuron and the other neuron. This is one neuron. The nerve ending of the one neuron is the starting point of the another neuron. That is, from the nerve ending of one neuron, the information has to transmit to the dendrite of the other neuron, the dendrite of the adjacent neuron. This is one neuron, and till the nerve ending, information has travelled in the form of electrical signals, and from here it has to pass on to the other neuron. The dendrite of the other neuron must receive this information. But as they are not in physical contact with one another, there is a gap between them, and this gap is referred to as synapse. And this gap is referred to as synapse. Here, another peculiar mechanism happens, neurotransmission. There are neurotransmitters at the end of the synapse. At the end of the nerve ending or at the end of the axon, there are neurotransmitters. That is, they again convert these electrical impulses into chemical impulses, chemical signals. These chemical signals pass through this synapse, pass through this gap between two neurons, and the dendrite of the other neuron, again it receives these signals and convert these chemical signals into electrical impulses again. The dendrite of the another neuron receives electrical impulse again, and the same thing happens. The impulse travels to the cell body, travels through the axon, and also travels till the nerve ending. And at the nerve ending, neurotransmitters are present. So there is a gap between two neurons. This is referred to as synapse. And at this synapse, a peculiar mechanism, a wonderful mechanism happens. Neurotransmitters play a vital role in transmitting information in this gap, in the synapse. So neurotransmitters, again, what they do? They convert these electrical impulses into chemicals, and they pass these chemicals, the chemical information, to the dendrite of the another neuron present adjacent to it. Therein again dendrites receive information, the same nerve impulses are carried, and nerve impulses travel along the axon, and the same process continues. Is this clear to you? So this impulse, the nerve impulse, travels from dendrite to the cell body, to the axon, until the nerve endings. So axon terminals have special type of chemicals called as neurotransmitters. So these are the axon terminals, and they have neurotransmitters. So what are these neurotransmitters? Neurotransmitters are the special type of chemicals. They are the special type of chemicals. Let's write a note on neurotransmitters now. So hope this is clear to you. The diagram is clear to you, and the various parts of a neuron, their description, and the role they play in transmitting these nerve impulses, and all these things are clear to you. Now we'll take a note on neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters. Axon terminals contain, or they release, neurotransmitters. Neuro refers to neuron. Neurotransmitters, and these neurotransmitters are the chemicals. Neurotransmitters are the chemical substances, or are the chemicals, specialized type of chemical substances through which signals flow from one neuron to another, from one neuron to the next neuron placed just next to it. So I have also mentioned a term called as synapse. What is the significance of synapse? I told you neurons are not physically connected to each other, therefore there is a gap between them. Space or a gap between two neurons is referred to as synapse, and we need to understand the significance of synapse. What happens at the synapse? What happens if synapse is not present? According to a few research, synapses are very significant because they avoid the loss of electrical signals. As electrical impulses travel from dendrite to the axon terminals, it avoids the loss of signals, because at the end of a neuron terminal buttons will generate or will release neurotransmitters, special type of chemicals, wherein these nerve signals or these nerve impulses are converted into chemicals. They are carried via synapse, and from synapse to the next dendrite the information is carried on, and the next dendrite receives it and converts it into electrical impulses, and further the electrical impulses travel. So let's understand the significance of synapse. Synapses allow neurons to electrically and chemically communicate with each other. So this is all about synapse and neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are the chemicals through which signals flow from one neuron to the next neuron, and there is a gap between two neurons. Neurons are not actually in physical contact with one another. There is a gap between two neurons, and this gap is referred to as synapse. Synapse is significant because synapse allow neurons to electrically and chemically communicate with each other, so that the signal passes very quickly. The signal is transmitted from one neuron to the another neuron, and finally the response is shown, the response is seen very quickly. So this is all about how a neuron works. We have some questions in the textbook. So figure 7.1, structure of a neuron, and below that look at the activity 7.1, and before activity 7.1 some questions have been asked. Let's try to find the answers. Look at figure 7.1a and identify the parts of a neuron. We need to identify the parts of a neuron where information is acquired. Tell me now, which is the part where information is acquired? The first information, who receives the first information? Dendrites. So where information is acquired is dendrites. Dendrites are the one which receive information, is it not? So where information is acquired? Dendrite. Next is identify the parts of a neuron through which information travels as an electrical impulse. Information travels as an electrical impulse. From dendrite to cell body to the axon, the information transmits in the form of electrical signals. So through which information travels as an electrical impulse is axon. We can quote it as an axon. And where this impulse must be converted into a chemical signal. This electrical impulse must be again converted to chemical signal for onward transmission. Is it not? Where does it occur? It occurs at the end of the axon terminal button or nerve ending. So at the nerve endings what happens? At the nerve endings neurotransmitters are present, neurotransmitters are released, and neurotransmitters, they help in communication between two neurons. Chemical and electrical communication is possible at this synapse with the help of neurotransmitters. So this impulse is converted into a chemical signal for onward transmission at the nerve ending or at the axon terminal button. So I think this is clear to you. Let's look at the activity 7.1 now. 7.1, put some sugar in your mouth. How does it taste? And before that I want you to understand few more terms here. Olfactory receptors refer to, olfactory refers to smell, something related to our nose, and gustatory receptors, gustatory refers to taste. So gustatory receptors will detect taste, whereas olfactory receptors detect smell. Gustatory receptors detect taste. Gustatory is something related to taste, whereas olfactory is something related to smell. So here is activity 7.1. Put some sugar in your mouth. How does it taste? Obviously sugar tastes sweet. So block your nose by pressing it between your thumb and index finger. Now eat sugar again. Is there any difference in the taste? Have you ever tried this? Or have you ever noticed that when your nose are blocked due to cold, do you find any difference in the taste of the food? Let's understand. Before that, you are asked to put some sugar. You know sugar tastes sweet. And if you block your nose by pressing thumb and the index finger and eat sugar again, do we find any difference in the taste? We don't find much difference in the taste. We feel the sweetness even when the nose is blocked. We don't find much difference because sugar has got something to do with the taste only. It won't produce something related to nose. It has got nothing to do with these olfactory receptors. Only gustatory receptors work in this case. So we don't find much difference even with nose blocked or unblocked. Sugar tastes same whether nose is closed or open, because there is no peculiar or particular smell to the sugar. Only taste is what is important with respect to sugar. Taste is the highlighting factor here. While eating lunch, block your nose in the same way and notice if you can fully appreciate the taste of the food you are eating. Have you tried this? Or while you are affected with cold, you usually don't appreciate the taste of the food. Even though the food is very delicious, you don't appreciate it, you cannot appreciate it. Why? Because the food, along with the taste, olfactory receptors also play a vital role here. Food will have a particular smell also. So here we can say food tastes different with the nose closed, because here both gustatory and olfactory receptors help brain in interpreting the food. So food not only will have taste but also will have a particular odor, particular smell. So both gustatory and olfactory receptors work together in helping brain detecting the taste of the food and the smell of the food. So this is all about activity 7.1. So the food is interpreted not only with the help of gustatory receptors but also olfactory receptors. So let's move on to the next topic, the reflex actions. The example, that is the example of touching a very hot object, or the example of blinking our eyes or shutting our eyes when a bright light is focused. These are the reflex actions. I told you movements could be either voluntary, we can decide how to respond, or the certain movements are involuntary, and certain other types of movements are reflexive in nature. We don't find time to think at all. We don't even think at all. Within a fraction of a second, the response is given out like anything. So in these examples, when a bright light is focused, we don't think as to what to do now. Is it not? We immediately shut our eyes. Or when we touch a very hot object, we don't think as to what to do now. whether should I take away my hands or not, what happens if I keep on holding that hot object. We don't have time to think, we don't think at all. Our thinking capacity will not work there at all. All of a sudden, within a fraction of a second, the response is given out. We immediately take back our hands. When a bright light is focused, we immediately shut our eyes without asking, without thinking about it. So this is what is referred to as reflex action. Reflex action. What are these reflex actions? These are the immediate, sudden and involuntary actions. Immediate, sudden and involuntary actions or responses. Responses to the stimulus. The stimulus or stimuli. So reflex actions are nothing but very immediate response or very sudden responses, sudden and involuntary responses. Most of the time it won't come into our notice at all. So these are the very immediate and very sudden responses for a particular stimulus in the external environment. So what is this reflex action? We came to know these are the sudden responses, and we also understood with the help of an example. So the nerves that are involved in this, the mechanism, the nerves or the travel of these nerve impulses involved in reflex action are referred to as reflex arc. The pathway wherein reflex action takes place is referred to as reflex arc. The pathway of nerve impulses pathway of nerve impulses involved in reflex action. Involved in reflex action is called reflex arc. Is called reflex arc. So the pathway of nerve impulses. What is the pathway the nerve impulses travel? So this is what we study in reflex arc. These reflex actions, that is sudden, immediate and involuntary responses, are maintained by reflex actions, are completely under the control of, or reflex actions are managed or maintained completely by spinal cord. By spinal cord. So spinal cord measuring about 44 centimeters is the one where reflex actions are managed. So reflex action is completely under the control of spinal cord. So now let's understand why reflex actions have evolved in animals. Human beings are the thinking beings, right? So our intellect is very sharp, our discerning capacity and deciding capacity is very huge. But even then, reflex actions have arrived. Even without thinking about it, even without thinking about the consequences, we immediately show response. Why is this? Imagine the same old situation wherein you touch a very hot object. The moment you touch it, instead of taking back your hand, imagine if you had thought, oh, this is a hot object and now I am touching it, so my skin is getting burnt. If I continue holding on to that object, my whole skin gets damaged. So now what should I do? Should I take away my hand or not? If you keep on thinking about all these things, and after thinking, if you decide to take away your hand, by that time your whole hand would be burnt. So the thinking capacity is not very highly developed in animals. So because of that, reflex actions have arrived. Although we are thinking beings, although the cranial capacity is very well enhanced, our capacity is not that much enhanced that we take very immediate and very quick decisions. So because of this, reflex actions don't give any time for us to think at all. Even without thinking or without even bringing something to our notice, these reflex actions will be done. These reflex actions are very vital in order to protect us, save us from danger. Usually reflex actions happen to save us from dangerous situations. So our sense organs sense that there is a danger, that there is a threat, and we need to escape, we need to protect ourselves from this threat. So reflex actions have arrived because the thinking capacity of our brain is not that enhanced that we take very immediate decisions. Although we think we take decisions, that's of course there, but is not to that extent that we take very immediate decisions, we process it very quickly, and we protect ourselves from the dangers very quickly. It's not to that extent. Hence, reflex actions are very, very vital in organisms. So the reflex actions are the sudden and involuntary responses. They are very, very vital to protect us from threat, from dangers. So here is another concept before us, which says what is this reflex action and why reflex actions have arrived. So for this very quick response to happen, what do you think there must be a coordination, and what actually is that important? What do you think that is really important? So this reflex actions are possible, or imagine you don't know about a reflex action. You need a sudden and immediate response. How do you think this is possible? How do you think this is possible? So this is possible if the nerves that detect, that receive the stimuli are directly connected to the nerves that exhibit the response, that show the response. I repeat, this is possible. The sudden and very quick responses are possible when the nerves that receive the stimuli, the nerves that receive the external stimuli are directly connected to the nerves that show responses. If they are interconnected, so then the responses would be very quick. And yes, exactly this is what is happening in reflex action. So spinal cord is that important part of our body wherein it entangles, it has so many types of nerves and bundles running and interconnected. So that's why spinal cord is the major, or all these reflex actions are managed and controlled by spinal cord. So now let's understand. I'll write few points why reflex actions have evolved, why reflex actions are important. This reflex arc, that is the pathway that is involved in the reflex action, has got 5 major parts in it. We'll discuss about them later. Before that, I want you to understand nerves from all over the body, nerves from all over the body, nerves from all over the body meet in a bundle in the spinal cord. In the spinal cord. They meet in the spinal cord on their way to the brain. So hence spinal cord have got nerves from all over the body meet in a bundle in the spinal cord on their way to the brain. So nerves from all over the body on their course of their traveling from all over the body to the brain, they happen to meet in a bundle in spinal cord, and hence the spinal cord is responsible for reflex action. So now let's understand the significance of reflex action, or why reflex actions have arrived. significance of reflex arc or reflex actions. Why have they evolved? Reflex actions have evolved because they have evolved because the thinking capacity, very important point, because the thinking capacity, because the thinking process or thinking capacity, or we can quote this as thinking process instead of capacity, we can write it as process of brain is not fast enough. It's not very fast. Reflex action we see not only in human beings but in almost every other creature like animals, insects. So in most of the animals, many animals have very little or none of the complex neuron network, none of the complex neuron network needed for thinking. So reflex actions have arrived in the absence of a true thought process. So finally, in the absence of a true thought process, reflex arc have evolved as efficient ways of functioning in the absence of true thought process. Although the thinking process is very well developed, is being evolved, but even then, even in organisms like human beings where the cranial capacity or the thinking process is very well developed, reflex action is the most efficient way, especially in saving our lives, in when a danger is encountered, in saving us from dangerous situations. These reflex actions are still quite efficient. So this is the significance or why reflex action is important, why reflex arcs have evolved because the thinking process of brain is not fast enough. Many animals have a very little or none of the complex neuron network needed for thinking, and these have evolved as these are very significant in the absence of true thought processes. So with this, I would like to move to the next concept, the parts of reflex action or the parts of reflex arc. How does reflex action or the reflex arc work? So what are the different or important parts involved in that? So let's understand about it. I think until here it's clear to you. Whatever has been discussed so far is clear to you, and further we will move to the next concept. A reflex arc, consists of 5 distinct parts. 5 distinct parts. Could you guess what are these 5 distinct parts? The 5 distinct parts. Obviously, the first part should be something that receives stimuli. So, the very first part should be a receptor. A receptor is something that receives stimuli. So, what are receptors? Obviously, the 5 sense organs are the receptors. So, it has a receptor, and what should happen as and when the stimuli is received? What should happen? What should happen here? It should travel, right? The impulse must be conducted, and it has a sensory neuron. Conducts the stimulus and also has got an association neuron. From association neuron, the impulse must move on to the motor neuron, and from motor neuron, response is seen, or an effector neuron. Sensory neuron is also referred to as afferent neuron. So, sensory neuron or afferent neuron, these are the 5 distinct parts of a reflex arc. A receptor, that is any of the 5 sense organs, or sometimes we also sense using more than one sense organ also. Generally, sense organs are the receptors, followed by a sensory neuron, an association neuron, motor neuron, and effector. So, these are the 5 distinct parts. In the next class, let's understand in detail about this reflex arc. Thank you all.